Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, I am very honored and pleased to have Paul Vanderklay and Jonathan Pageau here with me. The two of them, I have introductions written out for each of them. So Jonathan Pageau is creating YouTube videos exploring symbolism in religion, art, as well as in general and popular culture. He explores the patterns which underlie our experience of the world, how these patterns emerge and come together, and how they are glimpses of something more. Paul Vanderklay is a minister in the Christian Reformed Church of North America. He pastors Living Stone CRC in Sacramento, California. He enjoys pastoring a small congregation because he enjoys the people, and he also enjoys thinking through his faith and discussing it with others. Thank you both for being here. Is there anything I left out of that introduction?
Sounds good, except I'm also an artist, I guess. I'm also an icon carver, and so half of my time is spent making icon carvings in wood and stone, and also some traditional drawings. And that's how I share my time with the YouTubing.
Great.
I was just interested to hear how you'd summarize me, because I still really don't know what I'm doing. I'm just having fun, really.
Well, the topic of conversation today is how our times overseas changed our perspective. And I thought that this would be an interesting conversation because we've all spent a significant amount of time overseas. So before we get started, I'll quickly say what I did overseas and what I'm doing now, and then you guys can fill us in too. So I spent 3 years living in Malawi, Africa from 2013 to 2016. While I was over there, 2 of the 3 years, it was ranked as the poorest country on the planet. And I went over there originally to be a teacher, and then eventually just started doing poverty alleviation work. And then now I run an organization that continues that. It's called DonorC. And I'm very interested in talking to people who have had experiences overseas because there seems to be a level of, there's a commonality between everyone, even though we've all lived in different places. So.
Well, where do you want to begin?
Yeah, you go. You're the senior member here.
Well, I lived in the Dominican Republic from 1990 to 1997. I was a missionary with Christian Reformed World Missions. I probably had the cushiest experience of the three of us. It's a strange thing often living as called an extranjero in a place like the Dominican Republic, because by virtue of your white skin and your passport, you received a certain amount of status and deference. And I went to the Dominican Republic right after seminary. My wife was, I was planning on probably doing inner city ministry like my father had. That's the context in which I grew up. But my wife very much wanted to do foreign work. So we wound up going to the Dominican Republic. And it was my first job, really, adult job out of seminary. And it deeply shaped me. But probably along the lines of my father had done cross-cultural ministry in Paterson, New Jersey. And with the African-American population that had migrated up there between the wars. And that was the context in which I grew up. And then the other side of my life was this strange Dutch Calvinist enclave that the Christian Reformed Church is. And so I've always lived in these little subculture bubbles. And I think the one thing that I received most from this was the experience of not imagining that, not defaulting to the perspective that there is a normal way of being. Everything is contextualized. So I'd say that begins, my commentary.
Well, I was in Congo I was in Africa from 2003 to 2010, so 7 years also. Part of that, about half of that, a bit more, was 4 years in Congo and then 3 years in Kenya. I worked with artisans in both places, helping artisans to design their product, helping them to market them internationally, but also kind of help them with their marketing skills locally as well. And I worked in collaboration with 10,000 villages who buy craft from all over the world, and they sell it in the United States and in Canada. And now, still today, I'm still on the national board of 10,000 villages in Canada. So I think the biggest thing that I learned in Africa, which I still kind of bring with me today in terms of my own life, let's say, is I realized just how much change happens first in people's minds, and how much it happens in people's attitudes towards life, and their perception, also the perception of what's possible, and also the perception of their place in the world. And so that's how we ended up organizing. My wife and I worked together. That's how we ended up organizing our work in Congo and in Kenya, working with local people, especially finding local people that were extremely successful and that had kind of been able to surmount the difficulties of living in poverty and living in a challenging countries that have failed states. Congo is basically a failed state. And so finding those people that had succeeded, and then partnering with them so that they can try to change the way people think about their place in the world and what impact they could have in the world, because we couldn't really do it ourselves, because like Paul said, we were coming from the outside. We came from, what for a lot of Congolese they saw as this perfect world where everything runs perfectly and everything's fine, which obviously isn't true, but still that was their perfection, their vision of it. And so because of that, it was difficult to actually have influence on people. Whereas if you teamed up with someone that you could identify there and you gave them the power to affect change, then we saw quite a bit of things happening. And so the project that we started in Kinshasa, we started a local store and with a group of about 20 something artisans. And I'm happy to say that was in 2004, and we've been gone since what, like 2006. And it's still going. Like the store is still running. Wow. And totally locally with local people. Obviously, some of the artisans have changed. They're not working with all the same artisans, but the project is still there and it's still going. So I feel like that has kind of vindicated this idea of working really locally as much as possible, and just kind of working with people that are there, instead of just coming in kind of UN style with your top, here's our priorities, and we've got $10 million, and here we're going to just pour it in, and then they leave, and there's nothing left except for few people with nice cars, and
Well, that's a truly remarkable story, what you just shared, that you left there in 2006, and your efforts from your time there and the people that you worked with there are continuing on. That I say exceptional because it's remarkable that you were able to accomplish that, and it's also exceptional in that it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
And so that's congratulations on that. That's really wonderful to hear. Before to kind of like set the stage for the thrust of this conversation, what we're talking about is how our perspectives changed by spending time overseas. And so implied in the topic is that our assumptions or our perspectives did change. So I'm assuming that you didn't go overseas and come back and there was just nothing different in your mind. So there was something that fundamental that changed. And so I'm wondering, what were some of your perspectives that you held before you left to go overseas?
I think when I went to the Dominican Republic as a snot-nosed kid in my 20s, Which is me right now. I very much had, as Jonathan mentioned, kind of a United Nations imagination. The Christian Reformed Church had a significant work in the Dominican Republic. I just had my brand new seminary education. My head was brimming with theological ideas, and I was going to go down there. We weren't pastoring churches. We were working with mostly Haitian pastors who were living in the Dominican Republic, and I thought I would go down there and be able to be of all kinds of assistance. And I look at the 7 years I was there sometimes and think, I had to have benefited way more in those 7 years than any of the people I worked with. I look back on myself and think, they were terribly gracious and kind to put up with me. Now, part of the reason they put up with me was because they were working this idea that via me they could have relationships that would put them in touch with resources and networks and opportunities. And we always resisted that as a mission because we understood the corrosive effects of that. But probably the thing that most deeply impacted me was that by the end of the time, I had to deeply appreciate how inadequate I was to actually help that community. And over the time, I saw that many of the efforts, similar to what Jonathan described, were some of the best ways to actually affect long-term change rather than many of the top-down approaches that had been tried. And in an island like Hispaniola with the Dominican Republic and Haiti, this has just been ground zero for how much first world guilt and imagined, triumphalism that we expressed religiously and economically towards these people, and the kind of long-term dependence that has created and I think hobbled in all of the cultures on that island. So it was for me a tremendous education, but also deeply humbling. And it's something that I very much took with me into any ministry I work here in North America.
I think one of it's one of the assumption that I was surprised to see change, I would say, or that really helped to transform my assumption was really my vision of art, because I was coming from a high art world, and I had studied fine art in college and everything. I had become already very disillusioned with the contemporary art, but I hadn't totally understood another way of seeing art and of seeing of making things with your hands, and living with artisans in Congo was really something that was transformed for me, to see people working on objects that something very grounded, like the groundedness of their work was really eye-opening to me, and also the kind of the life of it, of actually making something for someone. There's something in art, this weird idea in art that we find, almost as if that if you sell something, you're selling out. Like if you make something for someone and you kind of give into their need for what you're making, you're selling out. But I see it total opposite now. I really see it as entering into communion with someone, your client. You partner with your client, and you it's a form of relationship where you talk about creating some object, and then you create it for them, and then that it's actually going to be part of their lives. It's not just going to be a status symbol or be something they put up on their wall to decorate their house, but it's actually going to be part of their lives. And so that was something that going into Africa that I didn't expect. Like it was a very deep way of seeing art that I held before going. That I would say that's the biggest thing that changed in terms of my perception of the world.
Yeah, it's interesting because we all went overseas at like different times, and Paul, I think you going overseas was at a time when you were a little bit more idealistic about what was possible. But when I went overseas, there's so many like horror stories. There's so many books, When Helping Hurts, Poverty Inc., all these things, that when I went over, it was like, well, obviously I'm not going to do anything productive, but it'll be kind of like a fun thing. And so I went in with really low expectations. And then I was pleasantly surprised that there is the possibility that things can happen, but there is a lot of ineffectual work as well.
I think it depends. I was really lucky because we ended up leaving with Mennonites. We left with Mennonite Central Committee, and MCC. I think they're one of the best organizations in terms of the way that they work, and they really prepared us in advance. So they took a lot of time to kind of prepare us. They would say things like, "You shouldn't work for about 6 months when you get there. You should just learn the language. You should create your network. You should connect with people. Yeah. And then once you've done that, then only then can you start to even put your foot out and start to see if there's something you can do to help the community." But that's been really helpful. And the way they work, that's how they really work very locally with local partners, and kind of empowering local people that are already doing something, that are already in a project, instead of coming in with your idea of something to do. And so we were pretty lucky because before even taking the plane, we had our kind of high hopes of coming in and saving the world kind of slapped out of us by yeah. by Mennonite Central Committee, which I thought was a really good thing.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, go ahead, Paul.
No, I was going to say it's important. Another difference here is that I worked in church development, and we partnered with Christian Reformed, what was then World Relief Committee, which very much had the same ethos that both of you are describing. They didn't start anything themselves. They usually partnered with a local, with some type of, tried to develop a local group. I think for me, part of it was in North America, we've tended, it was starting in the 90s, and it's really blown up now in terms of the idea that the church is, that the role of the church is to help people have their best life now. It's kind of an incipient prosperity gospel. And I think part of what working with these Haitians taught me was that that was just completely wrung out of me, because it was very clear very early on that, you know, maybe one or two individuals might develop a relationship with me and via that relationship find their way to a North American seminary and live as one of this elite class in this whole development community. But the vast majority of the people that I worked with were going to live brutal, difficult lives their entire life long. And so I had to reorient my mind about what does it mean to be a Christian in a world of suffering. And I remember even after I did 1 year as an internship, and then I came back to North America to be formally ordained and then return. And I remember having kind of sparring with one of my examiners on this idea of realized eschatology. He thought I was basing too much hope in the age to come. And I said, look, the people I'm working with, their community is not going to be rescued. This is going to be difficult and hard for them, and they are going to die poor. What does the gospel mean in that context? And so in terms of theologically, that deeply formed me and continues to form me today.
Jonathan, was that your experience as well, like learning about the magnitude of suffering that exists in the world when you went overseas?
You know, what really struck me, I think, in Congo, especially in Congo, was just how, I mean, first of all, like you said, just how difficult people's lives were. I mean, I often said that if I had to live the life of someone in Kinshasa for one day, I would just lay down on the floor and say, take me, Lord. Like, I can't, it was, you know, people would wake up in the morning without anything. Like, they would have nothing. And then they would go out and they would try to find some way of gaining enough money to get through the day and then pay for the transport to go back home. I mean, that just, to me, living like that is just absolutely nuts. But at the same time, it was weird because I saw way more joy in Congo than I see here. You know, people are just, you know, have a lightness of being, you know, a kind of capacity to trust God and to trust that, you know, that they'll be okay. They probably won't necessarily be great, but that is going to be okay, and they just move one step at a time, and I think that for me was really huge, and it did help me to come back here to Canada, and you know, it's not a normal thing to be an icon carver. It's not something that you could plan out and say, like, I'm going to be an icon carver. That's 3 kids, you know, that's what I'm going to do, and so it really did help me to say, you know, why do I think. And then I could see, like, the steps in front of me, that's what they were. I had nothing in front of me. I just had this one commission. So it's like, okay, make this commission. And then make that next commission. And I would just move like that. And for years, it was like, I would just move from month to month. The end of the month, it wasn't day to day, thank you, God. But it was like, you know, month to month. I would end the month and there'd be like nothing in my account. And then I'd start over and I just keep going like that. And I did that for like maybe 5 years. And I think that if I had not witnessed the faith of African people, how much they trust God to take care of their needs, I think that I probably couldn't have done that, and I'd be working some silly office job that would be grinding me into the floor. And instead of that, I have the chance to do something that is just amazing, and I'm having the time of my life, and I feel like I'm connecting with all these people like you guys, and it's just wonderful. But I had to go through those first few years where it was just, you know, don't think, you know, you don't have anything. You just have to just move that first step, one step at a time.
Well, so when I was going overseas, I think I was coming from a place of, I only lived in like a rational culture, like the one that we live in. And so I thought it was interesting, Jonathan, when earlier you brought up that one of the things you realized was like the humanity and like the level of working with your hands that people were doing. And so I think like that level of materialism has an interesting angle that you can figure out overseas. But the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, and I think even particularly you, Jonathan, since you've talked about this in some of your videos, is the were you exposed to a new level of spirituality that you didn't know existed until you were amongst these people?
I think, yeah, I would say yes. I'm lucky because I would say my wife is an extremely spiritual person, someone who has total faith in God and is willing to do anything. Like she has no limits. So I had already seen that in her, and it kind of frightened me a lot of
Like
times.
charismatic kind
No,
of.
not necessarily charismatic, but just this absolute faith that, whatever it is that God puts in front of her, she'll do it, she'll go through it, and even if it breaks her, even if it destroys her, brings her into very difficult places, even in her personal life, she'll go, and then she'll work through that in prayer. And so I had already kind of seen it, but it is true that then in Africa you could see it at a whole other level, where people lived, and it's weird because there's a good aspect to that and there's a bad aspect to that. I don't think it's totally just positive, because I also saw, like, on one hand I would see people, amazing people who were doing amazing things with nothing, just out of faith, just living on thin air, and then at the same time you would see people kind of give themselves to the prosperity type gospel and think that God's going to make them win the lottery tomorrow, and they would spend huge amounts on, like, I remember a guy who had spent like $25 on a lottery ticket, and that was like, it was like 2 weeks, like a week's salary, like 2 weeks salary.
Insane.
And I thought, and he told me, he's like, God told me that I'm going to win, and I was so angry with him. And I said, no, you're not going to win. I can't believe I said that, because I know you think that. But I was just so angry, and so I saw both sides. Like I saw both. But I do think that it's true. People are definitely more. They can't trust their own material reality. Like, they can't trust the government. They can't trust they can't trust the fact that they're going to have the material goods that we have. And so definitely it does bring about. It does make some people shine like way more brightly than what we see here. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
No, go ahead, Gret.
Well, I was thinking one of the things that I've got a fan spinning above my head right now, and one of the analogies that was helpful for me to understand is if the fan were to start spinning super fast and fly out the window, anyone from a context that we grew up in would say, "Oh, that's like the physics of the fan must have like tilted it in such a way that it flew out the window," and you can explain it entirely through rationality. Whereas if the same thing were to happen in a rural African context, they would probably say, "Well, of course that was demons that caused the fan to do that." Like there's a totally different way of looking at the same event in these different places. And so when I was thinking about my time overseas, the way that it's almost like the water that you swim in is completely different over there versus over here.
Very much so. Yeah. Jonathan's comments just rang so true. You'd see the best and the worst in people there. There were some ministers that I would work with that were, everyone knew they were a crook, yet this guy was tolerated, and he actually wound up having a terrific son who's doing a wonderful international ministry now. But he was just such a crook, and everybody knew it. But at the other side of the spectrum, there were people who, just like Jonathan said, they shone like the sun in terms of their faith and what they're capable of. And the question of interpretation, again, that gets back to the bubble question. I had grown up, my father pastored a poor inner city congregation in Paterson, New Jersey, and ministered to a lot of heroin addicts. And so these were the people that I grew up with, along with kind of the weird Dutch Christian Reformed people in their own little enclave. So all of this juxtaposition. But you would find that, you would find that in junkies in Paterson, and you would find that in little churches. And there was one church on La Isleta. It was a terribly isolated community, and there were two institutions in the town. There was a church and there was the bar. And it was, you were a member of one or the other, and these were the polarities of life. And there's just, here in North America, we just have so many ways of covering it up and taking the edges off, and I think playing pretend with a lot of things, and there just was no buffer for pretend. And yeah.
So how did you deal with some of those realities? Like when you realized suffering was pretty bad, when you realized that there's crooks in the church, how did you look at those realities and come to accept them?
Well, the one thing I probably accomplished in those years, so this particular pastor had been brought in by a previous missionary to kind of run things, because he was a Dominican citizen. He had excellent Spanish skills. He could also speak Haitian. He had all of these tools that made him very useful to the community of pastors, but they all knew he was a crook. And so as his reputation continued to implode in the community, people would come to me and say, well, you have to take him out. And I said, I'm not going to take him out. And they said, well, the old missionary brought him in, so you should take him out. I said, no, you as a group of pastors need to take him out. And I don't mean kill him or anything. I mean, you need to excommunicate him. I mean, church discipline was a regular reality. You offend the pastor and you're not taking communion for 3 months. That's it. There's no appeal or anything. So I told this group of people that they as a community had to discipline this man, and they were terrified of it. But eventually, I played chicken with them basically, and they saw I wasn't going to move, and eventually they did it. But what that did then for the zone was help them realize that this was their church and not the missionaries' church. And that was, of the 7 years I was there, I think that was probably the one big thing I did that I look back and say, it was a good thing I was stubborn and stuck to my guns with them. Because what that then allowed them to do was to say, we will discipline each other. This is our church. We will, it's not just a church. It's not Paul's church. So
yeah. I think one of the things that on my side, it was mostly I was working in the fair trade world, and the one thing that it helped me understand is things are a lot messier, just like things are messier in your life and than what you portray in terms of your public persona. Things are a lot messier in all these types of things, and so there's a kind of weird virtue signaling that comes with fair trade, where people buy fair trade coffee and they think that they're okay to buy fair trade coffee and fair trade chocolate and fair trade this, but it's like in the end there's no guarantee, and it's weird because there's no guarantee that it's fair trade, and there's no guarantee that the stuff that you're buying that isn't fair trade is worse than the stuff that is fair trade, and it's very difficult. But the one thing that it did make me realize is just how much it's really about human beings. Like it's all about human beings, and it's about people, and corruption is often it's really a human thing. And so I just kind of dealt with it like that, and also there's a hierarchy of, it's weird because we have that even here. We don't realize it, that there's like a hierarchy of corruption, and we tend to just hear corruption and we think, oh, corruption, oh, it's horrible. But it's like, okay, well, do you download MP3s? Like, do you like what there's the hierarchy of corruption, and so that's just how it is. And then you end up seeing it more clearly, I think, when you're in Africa, because it's kind of so out there, like everything's just kind of there. And so but I was lucky at some point. I was able to help to steer some fair trade buyers towards honest suppliers, to kind of be an exterior eye that could kind of look and help to find better suppliers where there was corruption. But I think for sure it does. You have a lot more gray. Like if you have a black and white vision of the world, if you live overseas, especially in kind of poor countries, you'll end up having a far grayer vision of things. Like you'll meet people who are extremely corrupt, let's say in terms of legal, let's say in terms of their legality, they're extremely corrupt, but they're so generous. They're just so generous to help others. And then you kind of put that on a scale and you think, okay, so how does that work? Because you could have someone who's as straight as can be, but they're a total miser and they keep everything to themselves, and they don't help their own family when they're in trouble because, it's like, it's not my problem. And it makes it a lot messier. Your way of viewing the world and morality becomes it's not as black and white. That's for sure.
To that point, when I was, well, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the company Cadbury, the chocolate maker, and they got in trouble for that very reason because they had, so it was found out that they were not using fair trade methods and that there were people in unfavorable working conditions making chocolate for them. And so there was this big outcry. And then to answer that, they created a separate brand that was fair trade, that was under the Cadbury umbrella. And so they just increased their profits by offering two different types of chocolate, one unfair trade and one fair trade. And you could pick which one you wanted to do. And then they had the market on that. So, but that speaks to the messiness. Like, even if you want the fair trade thing, there's still, like, what are you going to do? It's tough. We live in a messy world.
Yeah. Well, I think it's mostly not, I think it's most for the people buying things here, not to feel like they're somehow morally superior because they're buying this or that product. You know, I think that sobriety in general is better than just in general is better than to think that, okay, I'm buying all this stuff. You're like, I'm buying too much, but it's fair trade, so it's okay. You know, it's like.
Well, I had a situation where there were a group of people who were supporting a pastor. Now everybody in the Dominican Republic is a pastor who was feeding orphans, and so I was watching this situation. I was living in town, and they said, "Oh, can you help us out? Because we can't get him to send reports." And I'm like, "Okay." And so why don't you visit the feeding center and see if he's feeding people? So I go there and I say, "Okay." I visit the feeding center and I say, "Well, where are the kids? Or they're at home." "Well, I thought they were orphans." "Yeah, but they live with their parents." "Oh, okay." So, and I just realized that this pastor is just kind of working a gig, and these wonderful people in North America feel like they're going to help these people. And so they're sending money to this pastor who's feeding orphans, and he wants them to buy a little plot of a farmland outside and build a house on it and buy him a truck. And he's running this whole thing. And I said to these people, I said, these aren't orphans. He's not really a pastor. And this is what's going on. And they basically said, "We don't care. We just want to send him money." And I said, "Okay, send him money." Well, fine. And God bless him. Okay. Kids got fed and he did stuff, and this was his shtick. And who am I to judge him? Because well-meaning North American people sent money into the mission that gave me a salary that was significantly larger than his. So you look at these relationships, and just like Jonathan said, you begin to say, this is the way this stuff works. And we'll do our best to be honest and to actually not play too many games about our imagined moral purity.
Yeah, I think that's really the lesson that we can take out of it, is to see how messy it is, even in our own lives, and how even here in North America, it looks like, I think Paul said it well, that everything is dressed up here and everything looks nicer. But the guy that, if I buy wood from a guy, he still doesn't want to give me a receipt, and it's like. That's just part of. It's hard to avoid it. It's like you get, especially in Quebec. It's like people complain about the government, but then they work in the dark, like they work under the table. It's like we have corruption everywhere, but it's good to just be. I think that for me, at least, going to Africa, it just made me aware of just how messy it is and how we need to look at intentionality instead of also just looking at rules, and that's helpful for sure.
Do either of you guys have any optimistic examples of some of your perspective change from overseas? Because I agree, there's a lot of things that happen that are unfortunate and corrupt, and that's just too bad. And I have stuff, and then to add to that, the suffering point is even like, wow, you go overseas and you see all this suffering, you realize how corrupt people are. So like, it's tough. Like there's a big transition that happens. But what are some of the positive things that you gleaned from that time?
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jonathan.
No, there's so much. I mean, there's so much positive. I mean, the people that I met, like the relationships that I met, some astounding people that I could never meet here. People who sacrifice everything for their families. People who are willing to walk 12 miles to do something. Just because life is difficult, you end up meeting these astounding people. I remember meeting one man. He was he was extremely crippled, like he was bent over, and kind of had to help himself walk with his hands as he was kind of crawling along. But the guy had become an airport traffic person, and he was married and he had kids. And you meet someone like that, and he had like so much fire in his eye, like just this will, like just will to not get beaten down. And when you see that, it's so enlivening. People here are so gray. You walk down the street and everybody has a kind of everybody's okay, everybody's fine, but everybody's gray.
Yeah.
Well, not everybody, but it's just like but in Congo, for example, you didn't see that. You would just see the life just pouring out of people. People would be walking down the street and then they would just start singing, like there's no music playing. Like they just start singing as they're walking down the street. Like this tune in the back of their mind just couldn't be held in, and it would just pour out, and then the people would start dancing in the street. And so there was just this liveliness, which I think that we can all learn from, this kind of approach to life that's full of energy and full of joy. So I mean, there's so much positive that I take from my experience too. That's for sure. Yeah.
I agree 100%. We're, all the Jordan Peterson stuff. We talk about these hierarchies and we got these little hierarchies that we have going. But one of the things that impressed me is that Neil Plantinga, who was a professor of mine at seminary, writes books. If you ever get a chance to read a book by Neil Plantinga, read it. He talks about us as we're fallen royalty, and that we all, there's names that you learn and there's people that get famous and all of this stuff, but God places amazing people in the most surprising places. And the same person on one hand can be just an amazing person and also cripplingly corrupt and broken. And it's all together. And we so much want to simplify people down into good people and bad people. Almost the worst person you can find has tremendous gifts and blessings that they can offer, and vice versa. I think about what Jonathan's song reminded me. This isn't even overseas. This is living in Paterson, New Jersey, where I grew up. There was a guy who used to walk home from work at about 6 a.m. in Paterson. And we didn't have an air conditioner or anything. All the windows are open. And so he'd walk home from work. This guy had an opera quality voice. And he would walk home from work just singing at the top of his lungs. And we would wake up in the morning and just listen to him sing. And it was just glory. And so, here's a guy whose name I will never know. And so when I think about that, now you're triggering me as a preacher. When I think about that, and I think about the end of, when I think about the last day, when God calls all of us together and all of the grayness that Jonathan talks about is taken up, and we'll see the tragedy and the glory. I mean, this earth is breathtaking. And you get a chance to get into small places and actually have time to see individuals with a lot of the cruft taken off. This world is full of his glory, and it is fleeting, it is fragile, but it is also determined and rigorous, and those are things and stories I have from that period of my life I will never forget.
Yeah, I resonate deeply with what both of you are saying. And I think about when I go to like Planet Fitness to work out or something, I feel the grayness that Jonathan is talking about, just people walking around kind of like just bored or not happy or dull or whatever. And I feel like there was this color that existed in more impoverished parts of the world that I don't see around here. And it makes me wonder, when I came, everyone goes through or understands the experience of reverse culture shock. So living in a place of such color and coming to a place of perhaps more grayness. Two questions. One, was that hard? And then two, do you feel the grayness taking over? Do you feel some of the liveliness being sucked out of you by being in a place that's so safe and comfortable?
Well, no, I don't think so. It's weird. I mean, I think it depends on people, and it depends on how your take on it. But both my wife and I, we were really on the same page with that. is that if we come back here, like there's no way that we're going to get sucked into the wheel, like to the grind. Like it's not going to happen. And so because of that, we were able to, because it exists here. I mean, it's not as visible, but we ended up homeschooling. We are part of this amazing kind of diverse homeschool community that has everything from kind of anarchists to Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. Like it just spans the whole scale. And so we kind of entered into a way of living where it was like, no, we're not going to let this happen. And I think that our experiences in Africa, like the intensity of our family experiences and the difficulties that we had to face. I mean, obviously it wasn't easy. It's very difficult, especially as a couple, to be overseas. And so we went through we had to go through a lot of difficulty. So we thought, no, it's not going to happen. And so I feel like Martina and I, my wife, we talk about life and we're so excited. Like, look at everything that's happening. It's so exciting. I mean, Paul's probably in the same situation. It's like this whole thing, this YouTube thing is happening. I could not have planned it. I'm like, this is just amazing. Here I am. I'm allowed to make icon carvings. And at the same time, being invited by, some group at Florida State University to give a talk. Paul's going to Australia. It's like,
yeah.
I think it's part of what I said at the beginning. I think it has to do with the way that you engage the world. And it has to do with an attitude and a way of just kind of seeing what's in front of you and just walking into it. And that's definitely something that I saw overseas, and just understanding that that's also how people change their lives, is to be able to make that change, to change the way they view things and to see things. And that's also that's what I take to my YouTube videos. And I think Paul is the same thing. And when I listen to Paul, it's like we're going at the deep stuff. We're trying to go at the deep stuff and saying, like, you can actually view the world differently. You can see the world with different eyes. And when that happens, everything actually changes in its wake, and the world becomes more colorful and lively, and it actually works. Like, it actually happens. And then it becomes a motor for your decisions, and so I think that to me, I mean, obviously there are some things there's some things that I have to deal with, like the kind of crappy stuff that you have to deal with, all the bureaucracy and the stuff that you have to deal with here. But I feel like our family's been able to kind of to stay connected and to continue having a community experience. So, yeah.
Well, now I have another thing in common with Jonathan. We also homeschooled. I think for me, I was more easily sucked back into a lot of the gray comfort things in North America. I think when I think about that, and I've been back 21 years now, I think it's most often been the hard things in my life that I would not have chosen that have forced me to not lose what I learned in the Dominican Republic, to force me to, here I am, I continue to be at this small, in some ways perhaps dying church. It's a terribly small congregation, and who knows what will happen to living stones. But, and by other circumstances in my life that I won't go into, I've stayed here. And there have been other times when larger, more high-status churches, larger congregations who could pay me better and offer me these things, there are reasons why I didn't and really couldn't go after these other positions. Now, looking back after 21 years, I am so grateful I'm still here. And I'm so grateful for a number of years, those who are my Facebook friends know, a number of years I had a homeless man who I just could not get rid of. And he's in jail now for attacking one of the members of my church. This is not what pastors want. And, where I'm living in Sacramento, there are days I look at it, and I saw it the other day. I was driving down the road and I saw a woman who was off her medications walking down the street, stark raving naked. And I thought, I haven't seen that since the Dominican Republic. We're not that far away. But it's been these areas that I would have, in my own flesh, in Christian terms, I would have chosen the comfortable, prosperous route. And there's been my difficulties or hard things in my life that meant I couldn't. And it's in those places that I say, oh Lord, you save me from myself and you keep me. It's those difficulties that so often in North America we can use our money and our power and our technology to opt out of. It's in those difficulties that God uses and says, be alive to me and think a lot less of your own capacities and especially your plans and schemes. And to me, that is just, that is what has kept me spiritually alive in North America.
Yeah, that was a really refreshingly honest answer. And if anyone wants to go listen to the story of the homeless guy, that was in our other appearance where Paul was on my channel. So the next thing I wanted to ask you guys was, if there's lots of people who don't have the opportunity to go overseas, but they also see the benefits, and what would you tell someone like that? They would like the benefits of going overseas, but they can't quite get there themselves. They would like to see life in a more colorful way. They would like to live a life where they're more interested in people over things, more relational. Where do they start?
Well, I think that for sure that I don't think that living overseas is for everybody. I don't think so. It's hard to. It's a toss of it's not a toss of the dice, but it has to do with this idea of entering into an extreme space. And so I've seen living overseas absolutely destroy people, like completely destroy them, to the point where they actually can't come back. They do come back, and then they spend, they're overseas for a few years and they come back, and then they end up living kind of like as husks and like kind of bitter people who wish they could still be wherever they were and idealize wherever they were. So it's not just positive. Like, there's some definitely negative stuff that can happen. People who live overseas, when you're overseas, you're putting yourself at risk, like yourself. Not necessarily in a physical way. You're actually putting yourself in a dangerous space where everything that you knew and everything that you hold on to can be broken apart. And that can be really good because it can help you come back out on the other side as something that's much stronger and much more attuned to what's real. But it can also leave you in pieces. So I would say that that might be it might be a bit of a stern comment, but it's not just roses. Like, living overseas can be, especially if you live in poorer places, it can be really tough. Can make you bitter towards the place where you're living. Can also make you bitter from where you came. Like, it can make you hate North America and hate Western culture. It can make you hate the culture where you are. It depends on your experience. There's a lot of things that can happen to someone. But I think that if you want to have that experience, I think it's mostly about people. There are some people that really want to have relationships and want to have a community, and you can find them. Like homeschool is a great example of a place where you can find other people that are willing to sacrifice a salary in order to raise their children. Like, already the fact that someone's willing to do that already shows you that their values are different from the people who all they think about is to get the latest car and to renovate their house again. And so I think that you just have to look in the right places. In churches, you can also find that. Not everybody in churches, but when you go to a church, there's going to be a little group there in that church usually that's there several times a week. The people that are there that are cleaning up the church, the people that are kind of doing the stuff in the background, those people are the ones that have the different values, that their priorities are different from the kind of materialistic world we live in. So I think that you just have to be on the lookout for those people, and they're there. Like, they're maybe not as visible, but they're here as well.
I agree completely. I often tell people there's two lines in this world. One line is people who want to be loved, and the other line is people who want to love people. Everyone is in the line of people that want to be loved. There is no end to the number of people out there that need to be loved. And so if you decide you want to love people and prioritize loving people instead of being loved, every community in North America, and here in Sacramento, we have very wealthy communities and very poor ones. And you don't actually have to physically go anywhere. In fact, it's a little bit unfair for a whole group of North Americans to say, I'm going to use the third world as kind of an educational opportunity. Oh, yeah, great. You know, these people are already struggling to live, and now you're going to ask this of them too? Because there are some very unhealthy exchanges that go on in there. And it's far more a function of deciding, you know, I am going to prioritize staying in relationship with people who don't have much, or people who are jerks, or people who are, you know, I'm going to try and develop a healthy relationship with an alcoholic. You want to try something hard? Try that. Well, yeah, alcoholics are hard to find. They're all over the place. You know what? 9% of the population, or maybe, you know, you're in a difficult marriage that isn't working for you. Okay, why don't you try staying in that marriage? I mean, these things will test your soul, but if you actually lean into them and give yourself to them, the kinds of experiences that I think we had in the third world, it's not geographically based. And so, yeah, they're all over the place. There's endless opportunities.
I think that the one thing that happens overseas that has been good is that you're kind of thrust into a situation. You're thrown there, and also there's a kind of alienation from your usual drudge. Like because one of the problems, let's say, with the bad marriage is that you kind of fall into it, and it just kind of takes you down slowly, and you kind of don't realize it. Whereas when you kind of land in overseas, and you have to kind of relearn everything and relearn, it is a good opportunity to question everything about yourself, like, because it's forcing you to do it, like it you know, and you see how irritated you get, like, just because people don't understand you. All your darkness will come out of your soul. It takes a few months, but after a few months it starts to come out. Sure, yeah. Not right away it's like all sunshine, you know, but after a few months it starts to come out. So I think that is the one thing that it does. It kind of forces you to deal with things that you could have ignored a lot longer, just kind of sitting at home, you know, in North America. But I totally agree with Paul. Obviously, we both agree that you don't have to go overseas to transform your life and to transform your perspective. You know, there's people in your own community, in your own neighborhood, in your own church that are struggling, that you can just sit down and talk to. Just that is going to surprise you at what it's going to take out of you. You know, what's going to come out of you is going to surprise you, and then you have to deal with that.
Well, and what Jonathan said too, in terms of when you go overseas, you really do become like a little child. You can't speak the language. You don't know how to. I mean, you look around and kids are doing fine, and you think, I can't do anything here. And you become like a little child, and you have to grow up, and it's terribly humbling.
Yeah, I was finding that was kind of the one of the thrusts of what I was getting at, is I think I totally appreciate that you can do things here. You can talk to people who don't like you or who are alcoholics. You can go to an elderly home and meet people who have an experience that you just can't possibly understand. But I guess the benefit that I see that you both spoke about, and I want to reemphasize, is that when you go overseas, you are like pushed over a cliff. Like, you have to deal with things now in a way that wouldn't have, like, here I can just be comfortable, and then one day a week I can go do something that goes outside my comfort zone. And I think that there's quite a bit of benefit of just like a year of being outside my comfort zone, a year of being a minority in a place. Like, one of my perspective changes was that I didn't truly understand that the rest of the world doesn't look like me. Like, I just thought everyone was like a suburban white kid. Like, that was my understanding. I didn't really think that on like a logical level, but I kind of acted as if that was true. And then I went overseas and I was like, oh, wait a second. There's billions of people who have like a totally different life than I do. And that was helpful for me to realize. I'm not sure I could have realized it without stepping into that. So yeah, I just thought I'd reemphasize some of those really good points you guys both made.
Yeah, and where I grew up, I always knew I was a weird kid. When I was growing up, I thought everyone was black, because that's, except for these
That's hilarious. No, I think for sure it's been like I'll tell you. I'll give you an example like of really something that happened to me in terms of this idea of being pushed off a cliff. I've always been someone who, like, I never saw my parents fight my whole life. Never saw them fight. And then I also have very few memories of fighting with my brothers. And so when I got married, it's like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wait a minute, what is this fight thing? Like, what is this? Like, where does it come from? And I struggled to deal with it. I was always trying to be nice and not yell and just be kind of calm and everything. And then it was after 3 years we were married, they went to Africa, and one time I was in this crazy situation, just absolutely nuts, where I was in a village where we were giving MCC was giving clothing, and everybody was just trying to get stuff from me, get money, get stuff, and it was just this constant, and I just totally lost it. I lost absolutely control of myself. Yeah. I started cursing, swearing every swear word I knew. That had never happened to me ever. It never happened. And here I was, just livid with anger, and everybody was looking at me and they were laughing at me. This one white guy. Who cares? What is he gonna do anyways? But it was interesting because that moment really stayed with me. It stayed with me in very profound way. And what ended up happening is I learned to get angry, and I learned to get angry in a way that before all I was doing was suppressing it and pretending that I'm not angry, pretending everything's okay, avoiding conflict. And it's that experience was just like this door that opened, and it was a dangerous door because it could have led me in really, and it probably did at some point lead me into very, very dark places where I just started screaming or whatever. But it also helped me to realize, you had that in you. You were just covering it up. You were just pretending not to be angry. And so I think that I've learned to be angry and to also find a limit to my anger. So it was one of those moments that just pushed me over the cliff. I don't think if I had stayed here, it might have happened, but it would have taken a lot more and a lot longer to bring me down.
It's a great story. Well, because I've been in situations like that. We had work teams that would come down and they're going to build a church, and someone decided, I got this whole bag of goodies. They just walk through a neighborhood giving away stuff. I'm like, oh, you have no idea the mess you are making for me.
Yeah, when you guys went into these rural villages, did you have the experience where people had learned the English version of give me money or give me food, that kind of that was the one English phrase they knew.
Yep.
And
yep.
it was reinforced by the behavior that, yeah.
It was more than that. In Kinshasa itself, not just in the rural areas, in Kinshasa itself, there was it was the main way that people would greet you, not let's say in the lower spheres of society, on the street and everything, it was donne-moi 100 francs, which meant give me 100 francs. So it was that's how they would just greet you, donne-moi 100 francs, donne-moi 100 francs. People were so used to that I actually designed, because I had a shop, I actually designed a t-shirt and it said donne-moi 100 francs, piece. And I would wear that in town, and then the Congolese would look at me and they just start laughing. And they would see me with this t-shirt because it was they knew that was part of the game, and so they just thought it was so funny to see me with that t-shirt. They'd be like, oh, I want that t-shirt.
Oh, that's hilarious.
My coping mechanism is whenever someone said, give me money, I would say, give me money. I want money. And we go back and forth. But they kind of learned to appreciate that. So
yeah, my trick, what ended up happening for me was, because there was a lot of street kids, there's just too many street kids in Kinshasa. I was actually quite desperate. And so what I ended up doing was I had a Toyota it was like a Tacoma, it was called something different. It was like a Toyota Tacoma pickup truck. And I would drive around town with this pickup truck, and it had the big MCC logo on it. So everybody kind of knew it was like those guys, you know. And so what I ended up doing was I would give rides to people. And so like the kids, I would say, like, get in the back, like, where do you want to go? I'll give you a ride. And then I would kind of, if it was on my way, like I'd pick them up on that drive. And then sometimes I'd stop on the side of the road and I'd buy bread, you know, and then I'd give them bread. But it was like I tried to not give actual money, but to try to kind of give contact, to talk to them, and to give them food, you know, instead of giving money. But it's tough because they really were in a rough situation. Like they weren't pretending to be dirt poor. Like they were really, really struggling. But I do have one crazy story about giving money to street kids, which is actually one of the funniest stories that I encountered. In Kinshasa, they had these crazy traffic jams, like insane traffic jams that would last hours. You would get stuck because what would happen is people would start to pass each other when it would slow down. They would pass and they'd create like a third lane. Then they'd create like a fourth lane. They were actually doing that on the other side. So then at some point there'd be like these two walls of cars that would there's just two walls of cars on the street, and there was a ditch on the side. So there's no way out of this. It would take hours to undo the mess. So one time I was stuck in this crazy mess, like it was just nuts. And I'd been there for like 30 minutes, not moving in this steaming hot Kinshasa with no air conditioning. And these street kids were coming up and asking for money. And I'm like, Then I finally said, okay, you know what? I said, if you guys get me out of this bind, I'll give you like $20, like some crazy amount, because I just thought it was a joke. And then the kids, oh my goodness, they started screaming. They started hitting cars. They were hitting cars. Get out of the way, get out of the way. They started like threatening to like break people's windows. Get out of the way. So all of a sudden I see this little path like set itself up in front of me. And the kids are like, go, 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 go. So I started getting through, and it was pretty far. Like it was quite a bit, like a whole block that I had to get through. Finally, like they get me through this crazy intersection. And so finally I had to give them the money. Like I gave them and I bolted out of there because I was like, some people are going to be seriously angry with me because of what just happened.
Yeah. We had a similar thing happen one time when we had someone's sunglasses fell into the lake. And so there were a bunch of people who lived at a nearby village, and we said $20 if you can find your sunglasses. And the village just like, think of divers, like a Navy SEAL team diving into the lake, like running and diving in. And it took them like 10 minutes of like scouring the surface, and they found it.
I believe it.
So anyways, we got to wrap up here, but I was wondering if you guys had any last things that you wanted to include before we close out. We're at the 1 hour mark.
All right, Pastor Paul, take us out. Take us out.
Well, I, despite what I said about you can find it anywhere. Going overseas, especially right out of the, as a young adult in your 20s, it's one of the best ways you can spend your 20s, because again, you will continue to learn about the world in a whole new way. And so many of the conversations that I hear going on around us socially, politically, religiously, that extra time of being an adult child and seeing that there are so many ways to organize a society. Partly, one of the things that I came back from was a real appreciation for what we have here for myself in the United States, in the Western world. When there's a train that's coming through, they don't line both sides. The train is going. I mean, the traffic accident, same story. Everybody honks and yells at each other. I'm like, it happens every time. Why don't we, just stay in the lane? So, there's going overseas will teach you so much. And I loved what Jonathan said about it will teach you about the darkness inside yourself, which is one of the most important things you need to learn. And if you have that opportunity, take it. But don't. There's this thin line of elites in the third world that tend to live above it all. And to a certain degree, as a North American, that's going to be an element that you have to deal with. And so, okay, get to know them. But as best as possible, get into get beneath into where the people are and be dependent upon them to the degree that you can, and become like that little child. And and I think the opportunities there to discover so much in yourself and learn so much about the world are manifest. And so if you get that chance, take it.
That's a great way to end. I'll reaffirm what you just said, that if you can go overseas in your 20s, just like I did, and I think all of us were in our 20s when we went overseas, huh?
Late 20s.
Okay, so it's a good time to go, and if you have the opportunity, I highly recommend it, and then you can have cool conversations like this later on. So, thank you guys both for joining this conversation. I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I appreciate you taking the time.
It's great.
It's my pleasure.
The opportunity.
Yeah.
All right, you guys take care, and thank you guys for watching. This will also be uploaded to my podcast, the Gret Glyer Podcast. Thanks. Bye.